Welcome, war bosses, to the wild plains and deadly swamps of the mortal realms, because today we are beginning our deep dive into the Orruk Warclans. Now, if you've been around for a bit, you know I actually have several videos about the various units and the factions that are contained in this book. If you are newer, basically this used to be the Bone Splitters Battle Tome and then the Ironjaw's Battle Tome, then they combined them, and then with this latest edition, they added a new army, the Cruel Boys. And so with this new book, I thought it was a great time to do a second take, right? Start from scratch. I'm not going to take the other videos down, but I want to re-explore and re-examine what it means when we say Orruk Warclans, right? It's just such an all-encompassing term. It's so much fun. And so this week we are going green and talking about the Warclans from start to finish, shedding some light on each of the different types of orruks in the realms, who they are, and what they want. Now, one thing I'd like to add right up top here, if you like this video and you're interested in this faction, please consider using the affiliate link in the description down below. Noble Knight Games is a great store here in the US with discounts on all Games Workshop products, and using that link goes a long way to supporting me, my wife, this channel. It's life-changing stuff and I appreciate every bit of it. So for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar or this particular faction, the Orruk Warclans is an army that represents an astounding amount of life in the mortal realms. In every corner of the setting, orcs can be found, and while all of these scattered independent tribes may differ in size or ideology, they do have a lot of things in common. And that's what we're mostly going to focus on today, is what all of the different sub-tribes have in common, and then the rest of this week we're going to go into the various sub-factions. Orcs are easily recognized by their green skin, massive underbite, and incredibly aggressive and warlike attitude. In fact, all orcs love war. It might look different on how they go about doing it, but they love the thrill of destruction. Their minds are extremely primitive, somewhere between like an animal and a human, and their greatest source of joy and excitement and purpose comes from what they experience on the battlefield. They are generally pretty dim, and their experience of the realms is rather limited, meaning, they don't dwell too hard on religion or matters of life and death, the meaning of existence and so on. They're just orcs, and they just are. They are here to smash, laugh, travel, and do it all over again. There might be some variations on that, of course, but ultimately at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of orcs are just here for a good time. Now, one thing I liked about this latest battle tome is the possible explanations for how orcs have spread so far. Because if they're everywhere and have been here long enough to adapt to their environment, just how did they become so prolific as a race without a well-established culture, supply lines, and all those kinds of things? How do they get this far without the basic mechanics of civilizations as humans, elves, and dwarves understand them? And rather than just telling us, this book posits a few explanations by leading scholars, so we're kind of peeking over the shoulder of a study in Hish going on about orcs, and we can see what these scholars have come up with in terms of theories. One, obviously, they reproduce in the same traditional way as humans, which is male, female, but it seems unlikely because, quite frankly, we don't see any female orcs, nor do there any sense of a gestation period where they have to grow. The second option is that they are fungal-based creatures, that they are essentially, their skin is all waxy and green, and so when they die, their body decays, and from that gunk that it forms, smaller greenskins will burst forth. And honestly, this is my favorite theory because it goes out of its way in the book to mention their waxy skin twice. And so this idea that each one of them is potentially an incubator for the next generation, if their body dies and it's not burned, all of a sudden one becomes two. When you magnify that by a colossal horde, all of a sudden there's a lot of greenskins running around. And taking that idea even further is the last theory, which is they are just straight up plant people. It's just straight, they're not even mammals that we would understand. They are just advanced plant organisms. The truth is, all of those theories are speculation. And ultimately, it doesn't matter because the core issue still stands. They're dang near everywhere in the realms, and they are extremely dangerous. Now, it'd be easy for someone new to Age of Sigmar to say, oh, okay, this is just the Games Workshop version of orcs, and on the surface, you'd be right. I'm not going to argue. This is their orc version, but more is going on here when you explore the influences and powers of this race. Now keep in mind, there are different kinds of orcs, like subspecies, and we're going to cover those each in detail. But I want to hit some key notes about the Orruk Warclans that set them apart from other fantasy properties, and really understand these are generalities. Each subfaction is going to be different, as we'll explore, but these are things that every single orc will have experienced, if not just have an opinion on. And we can't start anywhere except their deity, Gorkamorka, god of the greenskins, in fact, kind of the god of destruction as a whole. He is essentially a giant orc with two heads. One is Mork, one is Gork. When they're together, they are collectively Gorkamorka. In times of war and conquest, Gorkamorka is a single-minded being of absolute devastation and destruction. In times of peace, these two heads tend to bicker and argue, and so the deity that is Gorkamorka will split, and Gork and Mork are separated until they reunite again. Now, each of these halves to the same coin have different ways of doing things. Gork, with a G, is very brutal but cunning, meaning he is all about strength and physical prowess, besting your opponents, smashing and crushing them with martial might. Usually his armies don't really favor things like magic or ranged weapons that want to run up and they want to punch you in the face as hard as possible. The flip side is Mork with an M. And Mork is all about being cunning but brutal, meaning he's going to think tactically, I guess as much as orcs can, but essentially that's things like setting traps, stabbing your opponent where they are weakest, assessing weaknesses, and then setting up an engineering entitled battle plans about them, using poisons and tricks and ranged weapons, all kinds of stuff. So they're both extremely devastating, but they just have different ways of approaching the same target. And this allows the Children of Destruction to see Gorkamorka as a single deity, or they could just worship its individual aspects. And we'll see how those things kind of take root in the battle tactics of each subfaction throughout the week. And while the orruks have a vague sense of an afterlife, something that they say is that when they die, they become a part of the Great Green, and that's pretty much where the thought ends. It's not really like a real religious structure built around Gorkamorka. He represents that which cannot be controlled or contained, a great equalizer for any faction, and possibly a representation of the wild nature of the realms themselves. Now, for the longest time, Gorkamorka was the only god-tier, character for the forces of destruction, and lately Kragnos has been another one that's been added. And he's an interesting character because he doesn't specifically appeal to orcs in particular, but he does use them quite a bit in his armies. And they are looking for a fight, and if Kragnos always leads them to a good fight, they will follow Kragnos. We can do a whole separate video about how this army relates to Kragnos. We'll cover it later on. But for right now, Gorkamorka is still, I think, the central pillar of this army. But the way that Gorkamorka manifests himself, or themselves, I guess you could say, amongst his children is probably one of the most important, if not recognizable, things about them. This, of course, is the Waaagh, W-A-A-A-G-H, exclamation point, all in caps. It's like they're yelling war, but it's just drawn out into a giant battle cry. And there's two parts to a Waaagh. One is that it is a military campaign designation, so if Gordrak leads a huge army of orcs and they start carving a straight line across the realm of fire or something, I'm just making this up, we would call that battlefront that's moving Waaagh Gordrak. But the other way is in sort of the magical sense, and the best way I can describe it is this. What if excitement and enthusiasm and thrill could be both contagious and manifest physically? That is to say, when an Orruk Warclan lines up for battle, the boss or whoever in charge is going to yell, "Waaagh!" And it's like a word of power that acts like a totem that instantly excites, psychs up, and gets ready the entire army. And it's more than just enthusiasm and cheering for your favorite sports ball team. It's palpable. It's an energy that links all the orcs in the area and can even be manifested physically by wizards and shamans into terrible magic. Now, I did a full video on the Waaagh, and I will leave it in the description down below, but I needed to mention it here because it is a vital part of understanding their story. It is their intangible link or network that all orruks are on. It gives them focus, power, and rage. And when it's directed at an enemy, a gangly group of greenskins becomes a terrifying engine of muscle and rage and power. Now, the last little pillar, I think, of orcdom, the war clans as a whole we could put there, is how they sort of organize or structure themselves, because this is not an army that lends itself to strict order. This is a gaggle of people all looking to punch each other in the face. So how do they organize themselves as tribes? Well, the different sub-factions will have different ways of literal organization, like how they split up into units and things like that. But there's one key concept that permeates it from top to bottom for every single one of them, and that is the notion that might makes right. Bosses are the best. Those are like the biggest of their unit. It could be the biggest of their clan. It could be the biggest of a whole tribe. It doesn't matter. Whoever is the biggest and the strongest rises to the top. Usually they are surrounded by other orcs who are somewhat similar in size, ready to challenge them for leadership of the entire clan. And every clan is going to have different customs on like how do you determine leadership? Like, do you do a fair one-on-one fight? Is it about assassination to kind of steal the mantle of leadership? All that kind of stuff. Sometimes, for example, the Bone Splitters, that mantle of leadership will include mystics and wizards, most of the time not. Because there is some leeway in who gets to lead an Orruk Warclan army, because honestly, as long as there's like an army in front of them that they can fight, most orcs are pretty happy. However, that puts a lot of pressure on whoever wants to be the war boss. Because if they are not constantly finding good scraps for all these orcs to fight in, they will be usurped and they will die. These forces are built around moving in a singular direction with sheer intensity, but they don't sit and idle well at all. In fact, they tend to collapse in on themselves if they do. If they go too long without fighting, all of a sudden they start infighting, meaning someone will raise a challenge to the war boss for being a crappy leader, and then everyone will divide and they'll just tear each other apart. These war clans can be big or small, but they all follow that same basic structure, and there is some nuance to how the different subspecies view things like might and what it means to lead and that kind of stuff. But honestly, for the most part, all of them follow that same core concept. Now, I always want to end these videos talking about why I think this is so cool, right? What makes these guys, the Orruk Warclans, unique amongst all fantasy properties that have orcs in some capacity. And it's really hard to talk about the orcs because everything surrounding them is so stinking fun. Right, like there's a million little tangents that you can go down, whether it's learning more about Gorkamorka and how they have these ridiculous mythos things that he was the creator god, and like one of them is that a valley was dug up by Gorkamorka's toenail dragging across the earth. You could go into weird stories about the Waaagh or their culture, how some are obsessed with specific kinds of combat, or that each war clan is going to have its own, mythos and creation myth. They really do make for one of the most, I guess, narratively versatile factions in the game. They can be from anywhere, doing anything, fighting anyone, to the point where every game group probably should have at least one player there with an Orruk Warclan army. They just make great villains in any circumstance. And if this video seemed a bit light on, like hard facts about orcs, understand this book, the Battle Tome Orruk Warclans, is like 3 books in one with a 4th army duct taped onto it. Okay, you have actual rules for Cruel Boys, which are orcs that are in the swamps. You have Iron Jaws, which are orcs that have been refined by the forces of chaos to get bigger and stronger and meaner. And then you have the Bone Splitters, who are the religious zealots of Gorkamorka. On top of those 3, you have the Big Waaagh, which is a way to build your army that includes all greenskins, all the orcs in one. So it's quite possibly the single most versatile book ever. I mean, it really is. For the same numbers of models that you have and the kinds of armies you can build, there's a lot of ways to play them. And so in this first video, the one introducing the series, I wanted to nail down what all these various subspecies have in common. And then later in the week, we're going to pull back the curtain and explore each one of these 3 subfactions one by one. Starting tomorrow with the newest edition, the Cruel Boys. So I'm so excited for this week and all the fun that we're going to have exploring one of the best factions in this game, and I hope that you join me for it. So let me know your thoughts on the orruks, your favorite units, either from the ones that they've had for a while or the ones that they've added recently with the launch of the newest Warclans book. And if nothing else, share your enthusiasm so that someone new can see why we love these guys so much. So thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in tomorrow's video. Happy wargaming.